Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Nick Harbor and how he is one of the most remarkable athletes on planet Earth right now. He is one of those guys that is going to be fascinating to watch on the football field, but for time being, you're going to have to tune into the track events to see him. He is someone that could make a run at an Olympic berth, so if you haven't seen that story, definitely check out that last segment I just did. But let's jump into the most important players for some big time teams out there. And let's start with CJ Allen. He is a guy for Georgia that I think holds a lot of cards for them this upcoming year. He is someone that could totally transform what they can be this upcoming season. And it was a little hard to pin this one down. I'll be totally honest with you. I think CJ Allen, is a on odds favorite to be a big time player, maybe the best player on this defense. But at the end of the day, well, Malachi Starks might be up there as well. Honestly, I could have chosen Malachi Stark. I could have chosen Nazir Stackhouse. I think he's going to be hugely important to their success this upcoming year. But from where I'm sitting, at least, CJ Allen is going to be the engine of this defense. He is going to be the leader. He is going to be possibly the guy with the green dot on the back of his helmet, although Smile Munden is absolutely someone else that can do that as well. I think CJ Allen has the ability to be a Roquan Smith type player. I think he can do things on a football field that not many guys can do. He can drop back into coverage. He can, play the run really well. He can play in the middle of the field. He can play as a rover. He can do just really, really remarkable things on the football field. And I think he's going to be an absolute beast. I think he's going to take full control of that defense and be a very vocal leader even as a sophomore in that room. So I love this kid. I think this linebacker room is absolutely loaded. Definitely a room that everyone envies around the country. But I think when we talk about CJ Allen, it's just in a little bit different of a tone. This guy has the ability to not only be a really good player this year, but be one of the better linebackers that has ever come out of Georgia, if you were to ask me. I think he can do just remarkable things. One of my favorite players in the entire country. So I think while I could have probably gone Malachi Starks because that back end needs some leadership there, I think I could have gone Nazir Stackhouse because the front end needs some help as well. I think when you talk about this defense, there is one guy in particular that can take it to an entirely different level, and I think that's CJ Allen. So I tended to go in that direction. Definitely will be a fascinating guy to watch this upcoming year, and will make some plays that will make your jaw drop. I can say that pretty confidently. And then we'll move on over to Texas and talk about Jahdae Barron. He is someone that honestly might have been a little bit overshadowed in Texas offseason. You had so many great things happen for Texas this offseason where you had a ton of big-time transfers come in, like Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, all those big-time guys. You had a ton of guys go to the NFL draft, and that was a huge thing for them. But I think the biggest thing in this offseason for Texas was that guy coming back. I think Jahdae Barron is so important to this team's ability, especially on the back end of that defense. And when you look at this team, I've talked about this a number of times where in the SEC, you can have a lot of really good players. You can have guys at every single level that are really good. If you don't have 11 guys that can play together, you're going to run into an issue. And to do that, you need really, really good leadership, and there's no one that is going to be a bigger leader for this defense and maybe for the entire team than Jahdae Barron. I think him and Quinn Ewers kind of set the tone around there, definitely are the most vocal and the most aggressive leaders, which is probably a good thing from where they're standing. And when you look at this Texas secondary, there's some questions there, right? There are a ton of guys that have a ton of ability and definitely can make things work if they play their best football, but you also do have a little bit of a worry where last year it wasn't necessarily what you wanted it to be, and you definitely want to take a big-time step forward. Well, Jahdae Barron, I think, makes all that work. I think you have a ton of really talented guys, and I think they would have been fine if they didn't have Jahdae Barron. I just think everything fits because of him. I think you have, the corners fit into their specific places. There was talk about him moving outright to corner this offseason, but I think he'll end up playing nickel if I had to guess. But I think he's someone that really makes everything fit. You can have Andrew Makuba, you can have Michael Taff on the back end, and then you have Jahdae Barron as a kind of rover who can do just insane things on the defensive side of the ball, both in run game and the pass game. A little bit better in the run game, but definitely still very talented in coverage. And then you have Malik Muhammad, who I think is going to be one of the better corners in the entire SEC this upcoming year. And you have brought in Javian Cole on the other side, Gavin Holmes on the other side. So there's tons of ability on this defense. It just feels like you needed the guy to set the tone, and this is the guy to do that. So I very much like Jahdae Barron. I think him coming back is as big of a thing that happened for Texas in the entire offseason. But let's move on to Bama, and let's talk about Malachi Moore. This guy is maybe one of the most important players in the entire country, if we're being totally honest. When you look at this Alabama team, there is so many questions. There are so many different things moving around, so many different moving parts that it's a absolute blessing to have guys like Malachi Moore on that team, to have guys like Jalen Milroe on that team, Deontay Lawson, a ton of these guys that have been there and did not waver when Nick Saban left, decided to come back, decided to be a part of this team, and are going to be huge for their success. And I think Malachi Moore, maybe more than anyone else, I talked about it, a couple of times on here where if the Bama defense is going to be, not necessarily great, it's because the back end struggles. I don't necessarily have any other questions about their ability. Maybe some pass rush issues, but I think Kane Womack does an incredible job of dialing up blitzes, so not necessarily super worried about that. The back end, I'm a little bit worried about. Now, they did a great job portaling in some guys and bringing in guys that they absolutely need. King Mack and I'm blanking on his name right now. It'll come to me at some point. But bringing in some guys on that back end is hugely important. But Malachi Moore is the vocal leader. Malachi Moore is the guy that gets everyone into place, that makes everyone assured that you come to Bama, you're going to work a certain way. And that's definitely a huge asset for Bama this upcoming year, that you have all those guys that understand what the standard is. Not only, the standard under Kalen DeBoer, but just the Bama standard overall. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I think he is one of those guys that if he, plays really well and he can get everyone into shape and make sure that this back end is in order, Alabama's a national title contender. If, it falls off a little bit and things struggle back there, it could get a little ugly pretty quickly. I'll be totally honest with you. But let's move on over and let's talk about Josh Simmons. He's definitely someone that is super important to Ohio State. And this one's a little bit tough to pin down because I think there's a ton of different things that they need. I think they need a linebacker that can be a leader. I think Sonny Styles will be more than fine at doing that. But at the end of the day, when you look at this team, there's not a ton of holes. There's not a ton of issues, and there's not a ton of players that if they go down, you're going to have big problems. Now, I think Josh Simmons could be one of those guys. He was a solid player last year, had a 71.9 pass blocking grade, had a 65.8 run blocking grade. So definitely a very, very talented kid, definitely someone that can do really, really good things on the football field. Now, he does need to take a big-time step forward in the run blocking area because the reality is when you look at this offense for Chip Kelly, he wants to get out on the edge. He wants to use his running backs and maybe Will Howard to get out on the edge, and he's going to have to be able to set that edge and seal the edge on the left side. And if he can't do that, then it's going to be a problem. There's no two ways about that. I think he's someone that has a ton of ability, came over from San Diego State a year ago, and I think has a ton of ability to be a great player for them. But there's definitely a little bit of worry there. There's definitely, if he doesn't take a step forward from a year ago, you might have a couple of uncomfortable conversations, I suppose. And also, when you have the most important job on the field, which is protecting the quarterback's blind spot, you're going to be a very important player to that team. So I think keeping Will Howard upright is as important of a thing in the world. I think if he can stay upright, he is going to be a big-time player for them. But let's move on to Oregon, and let's talk about Jeffrey Bassa, because this guy might be the most overshadowed guy, maybe in the entire country. When you talk about his ability at the linebacker position, it's just absolutely insane what he can do. I think he can do remarkable things on the linebacker position. I think he can do things that are going to totally change the way that we go, or the way that we look at Oregon this upcoming season. I think he can do just ridiculous things. And when you look at Oregon, there's a couple of things that you're a little bit worried about, right? That D-line is a little bit worrisome. That back end, you have a lot of guys coming in from transfer portal places that are very talented kids, but you never really know what they're going to look like until they get on campus. But I think this guy is one of those hearts of a defense, right? Kind of the C.J. Allen type example that we had earlier, where he's the guy that knows what the standard is, kind of like Malachi Moore we talked about earlier. He's the guy that if, a transfer portal guy, especially on the defensive side of the ball, needs some help learning something or needs some help with, figuring out where they need to be or alignment or things like that, he's the guy that they're going to go to. So I think he's going to be hugely important to making this defense work the way that they want it to up there and be the player that he can definitely be, because remarkably talented, and definitely with all of the help that he's going to have around him will definitely help him take that next step. But he's going to be hugely important to the success of Oregon this upcoming year. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Kentucky Wildcats, a very, very interesting team going into this year. Brock Vandagriff coming over has definitely put a little bit more of a spotlight on them, so I'll be very fascinated to watch them this upcoming year, but we'll break down what they could look like in 2024 right after this, so stick with us.